Is there middle ground? So if we look at 1776 and we look at the Declaration of Independence and we look at America today in 2020, there clearly is some impact in the echoes of slavery, and then after that, Jim Crow. There's clearly some impact in these deeply impoverished communities that don't seem to advance. And red line laws and all the other things that were put in place to sort of keep them in very specific areas, which to this day remain crime-ridden, gang-ridden, deeply impoverished communities.
Well, that's true, but the question is how much of that is historic redlining and how much of that is an 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody?
But how much of that 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody is based on him growing up in this fucked up environment where that's what he models, where everything around him is crime and gangs, and you imitate your atmosphere, which what all humans do.
Right, but the answer is there's only one way to break that chain.
What way is that?
That way is to not pick up a gun and shoot somebody.
Oh yeah, Diddy got a podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Ruling Class Podcast. And of course, I'm your host, Diddy, back up in this witch with another video. Listen, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, right? Hit the notification bell so you can be notified every time we post a new video. We are trying to get to 50,000 subscribers. I would really appreciate it. Now listen, Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, right? This is an older video, but yet I think it's very important for me to talk about this for a couple of reasons. Because when I talk about systemic racism, which is what they're debating in this clip, when I talk about systemic racism, this is what separates me from conservatives. Because when people typically watch my videos, they assume that I'm conservative, that I'm more right-leaning, right? But I have right-leaning perspectives and left-leaning perspectives, right? And I also talk about systemic racism because I know many of you that watch this channel don't believe that systemic racism is a real thing, which is all right. I disagree with it. I think it's silly to think that way because even the most right-leaning, largest voices on the conservative side, one of them being Ben Shapiro himself, does not even believe that it does not exist. It's just that it's a matter of how important and how much of an impact, right, that it plays on an individual's life and prevents them from still being successful, right? So without further ado, once again, hit that like button so this video can be promoted to other people. I would really appreciate it. Let's react to this foolishness.
Is there middle ground? So if we look at 1776 and we look at the Declaration of Independence and we look at America today in 2020, there clearly is some impact in the echoes of slavery, and then after that, Jim Crow. There's clearly some impact in these deeply impoverished communities that don't seem to advance.
Yes. So to make the argument about institutional racism, there's a couple ways you can read this. When people say systemic racism or institutional racism, I usually ask them to be a little more specific in what they mean, because there are a few ways you can read that. One is history has impact. Of course, that's true, right? That's true for everybody. It's true in your family history. Right? If you have a grandfather who went to prison on a particular charge, that leads to poverty for your parents, which led to more poverty for you, right? People have histories. Those histories are embedded in their life experiences, and that's true for societies as well. All of that is for sure true. Then there's the question as to whether the institutions today are racist. And that's not quite the same thing, right? Because history has consequences is not the same thing as saying the rules today are racist. Because the rules today are not racist, actually.
So, first of all, I just vehemently disagree with what he just said. But let's think about what he just said. Because what he just did and what he's practicing is a very common talking point, right? That a lot of people, typically conservative or more right-leaning individuals, tend to take. Which is they'll say, listen, I agree. Racism or slavery was a thing of the past. And we agree. We will even concede that there can be a lasting impact when things like slavery and redlining and other systemic practices, the impact that those things can have on an individual or their family. Even though many families and many individuals have things that impact them from their own family's history. But we'll give you that. But today, those systems have been fixed. We fixed it. Everybody's on a level playing field now. And there are many examples of so-called black people that are millionaires, billionaires, and even if you're not rich, you're ultra successful in a lot of cases because the system is a level playing field. Now, this right here is what I would like to call the monopoly analogy. Now, I can't take credit for this. I have to give credit to David Pakman, who's a very popular progressive radio host and YouTuber. He coined this phrase, and I have to agree with it. I don't know if he created it, but I have to agree with it because it applies here. And the monopoly analogy is essentially, let's say you have 10 individuals that are playing Monopoly. You know, the board game, right? Everybody starts off with the same amount of money, right? Everyone starts off with the same amount of property, which is 0. And you start playing the game. These 10 individuals start playing the game. And they play for an hour, okay? And after an hour, most of the property on this board has been bought. They bought property, they bought houses, they bought, hotels, they've raised the rent through the roof. They've started to build equity and wealth in their family. All they need is another 30 minutes, and pretty much all of that property is going to be gone. But at this point, about 85-90% of the property has been bought. After an hour, here comes another individual. They start playing the game, and it's a level playing field. Why? Because they start off with the same amount of money. They start off with 0 property, just like everyone else did. And they play the board game and they roll the dice just like everyone else does. But that's not exactly fair though, is it? Because now that they're playing, what happens? There's far less property to be brought. A lot of these properties' value is a lot higher than it originally was, right? Because of those circumstances, that individual is forced to live in neighborhoods, right, that have far less value, far more dangerous, right? Which significantly increases their chances of rolling the dice and landing in jail, by the way. But according to this analogy, it's a level playing field and all the rules are the same for everybody. It does not matter that there was a head start for the other 10 individuals. It does not matter that they're living a much better, wealthier, and have access to much better resources than you do. You have the same opportunity that we had an hour ago. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Figure it out.
But historically, it's fairly recent. If you go from the civil rights movement to 2020, we're really not talking about that much time. We're talking
3
about
generations.
50 plus years.
60 years, yeah.
Yeah,
not a lot of
50
time.
plus.
Right,
in the world of,
in the vast span of human history, it's not
a very small amount of time.
Right.
So clearly there's some impact of both racism
Absolutely.
and then Jim Crow laws. So that's where I'm saying there's a middle ground.
Yeah, and it is important for people on my side of the aisle, conservatives, to acknowledge and recognize the importance of history and people's living situations now. And it's important for people on the other side of the aisle to, at the same time, not attribute every single thing to history. Because
right. But
people
isn't
who are
there
born...
always something like that? There's always like extremes on each position, and the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, but I don't think that it lies as far in the dead center of that as people, I think, want it to.
Now, this is where I typically separate myself from the average liberal, because I'm under the belief that both things can be true at the same time, while it is also incumbent upon the person to make better decisions and not be a product of their environment and a product of their decision making. I agree with that, while also acknowledging that there are many contributing factors to a person's, societal surroundings, right? To a person's family history, to their, not just their history, but their current family situation, right? To their financial or socioeconomic status, right? The people that they're surrounded by, right? The things that they're taught or the lack of things that they're taught. Those things are just as significant as that person's, personal decision making, right? Both of those things matter. But if you notice here, because Ben Shapiro actually acknowledged that both of those things matter. Now, he said many people would argue that one is probably more important than it actually is, or plays a bigger role than it actually does. But nonetheless, he said that he acknowledges that it's not just a person's personal decision making that matters, but also their, the historical impact that plays a role as well. I want you to remember that he said this because just a few minutes later in this same conversation, he's about to do a complete 180 and come right back to the decision and the conclusion that no. Black people have to make better decisions, and that's what it's about at the end of the day. And that's it. Truly incredible.
The way to fight against that is to make good decisions. And so you fight against the system to make sure that the system has rules that apply equally to everyone.
Right, but you clearly see that there's a big difference between people coming over here willingly and doing so in order to better their lives versus someone whose ancestors were dragged over here to be sold as property, and then dealing with the repercussions of that being your family history and red line laws and all the other things that were put in place to sort of keep them in very specific areas, which to this day remain crime-ridden, gang-ridden, deeply impoverished communities.
Well, that's true, but the question is how much of that is historic redlining and how much of that is an 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody?
But how much of that 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody is based on him growing up in this fucked up environment where that's what he models, where everything around him is crime and gangs, and you imitate your atmosphere, which is what all humans do.
Right, but the answer is there's only one way to break that chain.
What way is that?
That way is to not pick up a gun and shoot somebody.
I think
That's
that's
not
a
true.
simplistic
That's not the only way.
of looking at it if you're on the outside of that community and you're not one of those 18-year-old kids that grows up with the incredible influence of all the people around him, and that's all you see, and that's all you know.
Well, but the problem is the only way that's going to be the thing that your kid doesn't know is for you not to do it. At some point, personal agency has to come in.
It does,
because
education and teaching them about personal agency and letting them understand that there's a way out of this and that the path that they see being replicated over and over again by these people that wind up dying young, that wind up going to jail, that there are other options.
And that's one of the most incredible and outright ludicrous arguments that I could never understand coming from any person's mouth, let alone a conservative, right? Ben Shapiro saying, hey, 18-year-old kid that has grew up his or her entire life only witnessing, hearing, and seeing a particular thing, snap out of it, do what I would do, and do what other people have done, and just make better decisions. It's that simple. Force yourself to know things and have discipline you were never taught to have, and make better decisions. At 18 years old, your brain's not fully developed, doesn't matter. Figure it out. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to change that is your personal decision making. That's a very disingenuous statement to make. While personal decisions does matter and people do need to be held more accountable, to not attribute a lot of that responsibility upon the systems, right, or the environment, and trying to change those circumstances for a lot of these people, me being one of them, that are coming from these environments, to say that those does not even need to be changed or acknowledged or addressed is absolutely insane. Coming from someone as intelligent as Ben Shapiro, right? And one of the biggest issues I have is when people look at successful or look at the exception to the rule, someone like me, and say, Demetrius, look at you. You figured it out. Look at what you're doing in your life. You make good money. You have a podcast. You have a great job. Look what you do every day. You came from these impoverished, disenfranchised, disadvantaged environments just like they did. You didn't become a gang member. Why can't they be like you? Everyone isn't the same, and you know everyone is not the same. It's very disingenuous. You all, truly mind-blowing. Hop in the comment section. Let me know what you think about this. Like this video, hit that notification bell so you can be notified every time we post a new video. This is absolutely insane.
Oh yeah, Diddy got a podcast.